everybody, welcome to my silicone mold class. I'm super excited to have a chance to teach you how to create silicone molds for your business or even for personal use. These are going to be so much fun to work with. I think you're going to really enjoy being able to create your own molds. I know it's pretty common to go online and purchase them, and it can get a little bit expensive. I'm not saying that creating your own is going to be any cheaper, but it's sometimes fun to be able to create your own designs and make your own molds. I really started off as a resin artist and needed some custom molds and decided to really start creating my own. So we're going to start off by opening up and using our transfer tape. The first thing we need to do is stick down all of our actual housings and our blank pieces, and we've got to get them onto something pretty darn sticky to make sure that the silicone doesn't leak out from under them. So the first thing I'm doing here is sticking down all of my housings and putting them onto the transfer tape to make sure that everything is stuck down nice and good so that my silicone doesn't leak. We all know it's very expensive and nobody wants to waste any silicone. So the next thing we're going to do is continue to place all of our housings and our blanks onto our transfer paper. These blanks and housings are things that I've made myself. I do have a laser cutter, so I do prefer to cut my own blanks, but I did in the beginning purchase them from other people. Even someone like me who sells on Etsy, you can definitely purchase blanks from people when you decide to start making your own molds. So what you can see, the two blue pieces up in the corner are pieces of housing that are made from acrylic. So basically just cut them out to be the same shape and size as the blank that I'm using. That way they basically come out as the same shape as the blank. You'll see a lot of people that do that where it's kind of shaped already as the shape of what the mold is going to be, and it's kind of just a fun extra touch. They're not always the easiest to work with because you want to make sure that you've got them pretty darn centered so you don't have any thin pieces when you have the silicone poured. So sometimes I do prefer to use a standard shape than the ones that are shaped like blanks, but on the other hand, they do save some silicone when you have the blank housing shaped correctly. Like if you do, you'll see later in the video a moon where I only have a big giant circle shape, and so therefore it's kind of a waste of silicone. So sometimes it is smart to get a piece or a housing piece that can help you, utilize less silicone and not waste. The other pieces you can see here that I'm using are 3D mold housings. So I've bought those from several different shops online. A bunch of people sell them between Etsy and a bunch of different websites. There's a lot of silicone mold Facebook groups as well. If you're trying to get into it, it's a really great way to get tips and tricks and suggestions from people. So these are 3D mold housings. I really like them because they stick really well for the most part to the transfer tape. You can see me kind of pushing and rubbing it up against the table to create a good seal and try to get all the bubbles out and anything that might be, in between, because we want the silicone to obviously come over the top of our blanks and not get under it. I used a lot of cookie cutters and hot glue at the beginning, but honestly it just takes forever and you really have to cut the transfer paper under each piece, and it just takes quite a long time and it's really tedious. I've found that this method works a lot better, at least for me personally. So I really like the 3D housings. They're not super expensive, which is nice. I've got them in a bunch of different sizes and shapes. I find it really much easier to use these and just use one long piece of transfer paper instead, rather than cutting a bunch of pieces. It's a pain, and I like whatever is going to make my job much more efficient. So I'm typically making somewhere between 20 and 50 molds a week for my shop. So this is the best way that I have personally found. One of the things to keep in mind when you're thinking of your transfer tape is that silicone has a resist to anything with sulfur in it. So when I first started, I bought a specific transfer tape that must have had sulfur in it, and nothing would cure for the life of me. I thought I was doing it wrong. I thought I was mixing wrong. really came out to be that it was the transfer tape. Ever since I switched to the Cricut brand, I have not had any issues. So I would definitely recommend, if you are having issues thinking about what is on your transfer tape, is there something on your mold, if something's not curing, it's most likely that something has some kind of sulfur in it. Obviously, it's kind of hard to find the ingredients of transfer tape, so I guess I could work for you here and helped you with this, because I already know that the Cricut transfer tape works really well, so it's a good product to start using. Alright, so I'm gonna speed it up here a little bit so you don't have to watch me sticking down these blanks and housings to every single one forever, because that would be very boring. So we shall get this sped up, but obviously you want to make sure everything's stuck down really well, that there's no splits or anything or bubbles or anything under the transfer tape either, because you have to consider that it is going to warp the top of your molds. So that's something to consider and think about as well, and make sure you're using a level surface so that your silicone can dry and be level. If you don't use level silicone, the resin piece that you pour is not going to be level, obviously. So I'm speeding this up here. You can see me sticking down some additional blanks and also 3D housings. At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter what your 3D housing looks like as long as it sticks down. I'm notorious for not taking the time to peel all the silicone off of the pieces after I use them, so it's just kind of me. You can do whatever makes you happy. As you can see here, like that moon, that's one where I was talking about kind of a waste of space. So I typically, if I'm doing that for a customer, will try to throw an extra piece in for them, as I did right there, adding that little heart, just so, it's an extra little treat, and I'm going to use the space for silicone anyways, so I might as well put something in it. Then you can see me here actually utilizing a dish. So it's a ring dish that I'm making a 3D mold of. This is a housing that is deeper, obviously, than a standard housing, because you have to be able to fill the silicone all the way on top, of course, of the dish. Most of the blanks, acrylic blanks, are like a 1/4 inch thick or an 1/8 inch thick, whereas that's like 2 inches deep. So you want a big, deep, wide housing. I also would prefer usually having a 2-piece mold, so it breaks, so it comes off in half. I didn't have one that's the size properly for that ring dish. Lastly, here you can see me working on my big giant 8-inch moon mold and throwing a little sloth in there again just to utilize the space. I should cut an acrylic piece that fits it, but I just haven't gotten there yet. So the next thing we need to do is pour and mix our silicone. So I'm using Smooth On 15 Slow is the brand. I buy it from Reynolds Advanced Materials. You can find them online. They ship really quickly, which I love. I buy it in really the 1 or 2 gallon sizes, and then I pour it into the smaller jar. It's a little easier for me to handle. It's a 2-part silicone, and so it's equal parts of A and B. I prefer this silicone just because it has a little bit longer of a working time. It does take like 4 hours to cure, but I've used ones that are faster, and the working time is less, like 6 to 15 minutes. It doesn't really give me personally enough time to perfect the pores and make sure I get all the bubbles out, so I really prefer a silicone that gives me more working time. It is blue, obviously, and one of the things you can do is put a silicone colorant in, which you'll see me use just a little bit here. So I pull it off and I'm gonna stir it really well, definitely for a minute or two. Make sure you scrape all the sides. You can see actually I missed a little spot, and I'm gonna go back and scrape the front there. We don't really want to see any white. You really want like a good consistent blue color all the way across. I always mix my actual silicone before I put any colorant in, because obviously the colorant is going to tint and you're not going to be sure if you actually mixed really well. So obviously mixing everything first before you put color in is the smartest way to do it. What I'm doing here is putting in the colorant. Usually I use purple, but I ran out, so this is a blue and green colorant that I put in. It doesn't stand out super bright. I prefer the purple one. You do have to use quite a lot of this in the blue silicone, obviously, because you're tinting a silicone that's already a color. Some people do use clear silicones as well, which I'm in the process of testing the Dragon Skin brand, and so I'm sure I will give you an update on that down the road. So I'm just going to go ahead and mix in the colorant here, and we're back. And It's a little more green, but it's still a little bluish. It wasn't the best example of a colorant to use. The next thing we're going to do is brush on our silicone to any blank that has engraving. So I'm using a silicone makeup brush. It's literally just one that you can find on Amazon. And I am dipping into my silicone and brushing it on to all of my engraved pieces. The reason I want to do this is to prevent any bubbles from forming. If you were to just pour your silicone straight in here without brushing it on, as it settles, there's going to get a lot of bubbles created into those little grooves and pieces in the engraving. So I've found that brushing on your silicone really makes a huge difference with minimizing the amount of bubbles that happen in your pieces. So the first thing I'm doing is brushing on the silicone onto the engraving of each of my pieces. I'm also going to put little dab of silicone into any keychain holes or any hole for maybe earrings that I've got that I'm making. That's one of the first things I do because I want to let the silicone settle in the hole and make sure that there's no bubbles. If you get a bubble into that little hole and it doesn't come out before the silicone really starts to cure, then you're going to end up with that little tiny piece not actually being there, so that when your customer tries to make their keychain, the hole isn't going to develop. So it's a really key piece to make sure that you don't have that bubble inside of that little tiny hole. You can brush over it a couple of times, just make sure you're getting any air bubbles out, make sure it's filled with silicone, or you can stick a little toothpick in. Sometimes I use like a little end of the tweezer just to make sure you don't have any bubbles in there. It's really a key piece because otherwise it's basically wasted. I don't prefer, and you wouldn't want somebody to send you a keychain mold that doesn't work. So it's really important to make sure that that hole is actually filled all the way. So you can see me here just really brushing on the silicone. The other thing is to brush as a thin layer. The whole point is to not create bubbles, and so the thinner layer you leave on there, the better it's going to settle and the less amount of bubbles it's going to create. It's taken a little bit of experimenting, and honestly at the end of the day, bubbles are still going to happen, micro bubbles happen. As long as it's not going to affect the final piece, then there really isn't an issue with it, but it happens. The silicone is going to have these little tiny micro bubbles, and little things are going to get stuck in there. I mean, I have 2 dogs and hairs happen too, so you have to just do your best to keep your environment as clean as possible, and make sure that you put any disclaimers for your customers that yes, micro bubbles will happen, micro particulates are going to happen, but at the end of the day, it shouldn't affect their final product. If it does, obviously do the right thing and exchange it for them. As you can see in that bottom corner, I have the little tiny hole filled for that little keychain I'm making, and that's one of the things I like to do is go through, like I said, and fill up all the holes, which I'm doing here. I just drop a little tiny bit in, and I like to let them settle for as long as possible. So usually I'll do the little holes first and make sure that they're completely settled and there's no bubbles before I actually start to pour my silicone. So I've just gone through and filled up the holes everywhere on the different blanks. I've got little straw toppers that have holes as well, and they're a little bit bigger. They don't tend to create bubbles like the little tiny pieces do, but it's just easier to fill them up now rather than try to fill them after the fact and have to worry about bubbles coming up. Then I'm just going to continue brushing everything on and make sure that everybody's coated that should be before I pour the silicone. The other thing to note is that you don't need to brush on silicone to a mold that doesn't have an engraving. That's not really necessary. And then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to start pouring our silicone. I like to pour directly into one space, but we don't want to fill it all the way up. We want to fill it just a little bit at a time so that the silicone has the ability to spread into the mold. It allows it to pop and get rid of as many bubbles as possible. So I do just pour a thin layer to get started into each of the pieces, and then I want to give them a little bit of time to settle. This goes along with obviously having a silicone that has a longer working time. If you have a silicone that cures in 6 minutes, it's great to get done faster, but it doesn't really give you the best quality at the end of the day because it doesn't allow you to pop all the bubbles, get any issues out, make sure everything is correct before it starts to cure. It even has a little bit of difficulty with the self-leveling because it'll start to cure if you're not all the way filled. So to me, something that has a little bit longer cure time is the best to work with. So you can see me here, I'm kind of just filling everything. Obviously, you want to like scrape that measuring cup because you don't want to waste anything. I did make myself that little stir stick out of acrylic. I was just sick of wasting wooden stirrers, so I just cut myself that piece out of 1/4 inch acrylic, and it's been working pretty well because obviously silicone doesn't stick to acrylic, so I'm able to just peel it off, throw it away, and start again. So I had to mix up a little bit more silicone here to finish off my molds. Once I've done my first pour, then I'm going to go back to the beginning and continue pouring. Basically, at the end of the day, you don't want to be able to see your blank through the top of the silicone. If you see any edges, if you can physically see it, your silicone's not deep enough and you need to continue pouring until you can't see it anymore. I've seen some people where they'll, mark on the housing where is a good, pour line to make sure you've filled it all the way up. So if that works for you, that is super easy. I sometimes use my acrylic housings as a judgment because I know that they're double the thickness of my blank. So I know that if they're all the way filled and the blank housings are filled like that, then they're filled enough. But as you can kind of see, you can still see the blanks through them. So that says to me that they're not filled high enough and they're going to be too thin. And if you send one that's too thin, it's just going to rip. It's not going to be great quality. So you want to make sure that you fill up your silicone really well. At the end of the day, it's better to do it the right way than have to fix it and send it back to the customer again. It's going to cost you more shipping. It's going to cost you more silicone. So do it the right way the first time. Obviously, mistakes happen, but at least make sure that they're filled all the way. I like to make sure that they're good and thick so that they have a lot of life with them and that my customers can get a lot of use out of them. So you can see here, I'm just continuing to fill my blanks and my housings. We definitely don't want any silicone to go to waste. I hate wasting it. It's so expensive. So to me, it's really a critical piece to make sure you don't waste it. Sometimes I overmix, and so I'll just like grab an extra housing and blank real quick and pour something else, some little pieces that I might send as extra little gifts to my customers, or just pieces to sell as like B grade or things like that. So to me, I want to try to utilize as much as I can. Obviously, once it's past the working time, you can't reuse it. So you want to make sure you get it done and use as much as you can. Just finishing off the last bits of final touches of my silicone there. And there you have it. All of my silicone molds are poured, and they are going to need about 4 hours to cure. I usually leave them overnight. Honestly, I'd rather give them a little bit of extra time. You don't want to peel it too early because it could rip and it could not cure all the way. So to me, if I have the time, I do tend to leave them overnight. As you can see, things leak, things get messy, but it happens. If you want to see what they look like and see how I unmold and get them ready to ship for my customers, keep an eye out for my unmolding video that is coming next.